products. So move here. So when we're looking at this PAR, or photosynthetically active radiation, we're looking at the light with a wavelength between 400 and 700 nanometers. And in general, increasing the energy in that PAR range increases the plant photosynthesis. And each plant will have sort of that optimum amount that is going to work best for them. So why is it important? Obviously, that optimum light intensity will maximize the plant growth. For growers using additional lighting in their operations, it can help determine the requirements for their plants and whether they're being met or not, or if there's actually excess radiation that the grower is spending extra energy, extra money on that isn't actually needed for optimum plant growth. Because once you sort of hit that optimum amount, then anything over that is just kind of wasted. And part of this, so why this initially got brought up was, I know that I've worked with a grower here in our area that uses additional lighting. They have a year-round growing operation with heated greenhouses. So they were interested in measuring the PAR for some of their lights. But then they also were interested in just seeing what sort of differences there was in terms of light transmission through different greenhouse plastics or through some older greenhouse plastics versus some new ones that they had. So that was initially why we got interested in looking more into these PAR meters. And so what we ended up, what I ended up using with these growers was one that I borrowed from Dr. Pepe on campus, which was a LICOR quantum photometer. This one, let's see, it's on my right. I think it'd be on your right as well. But then we ended up purchasing the Apogee quantum meter, which Ben can talk a little bit more about. And you know, I haven't had a lot of time to play around too much with the new one that we just got, but you can see I did some comparisons just yesterday looking at, you know, just sitting on my desktop. What was this? It's the photosynthetic photon flux density that we're looking at. And you can see that for the most part, they're pretty similar. I looked at, here's a little just grow lights that I have for starting seedlings. This is the reading I was getting from just the fluorescent bulbs that are in that unit. When we went outside, we don't have the leveling plate for the Apogee meter, and that's probably something that we'll want to get. Because I particularly noticed outside that it's, you know, definitely changes a bit as it changes angle. So I will then pass this over to Ben and let him talk more about this PAR meter and let him introduce himself. All right, I think you're still muted, Ben.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Ben Crabb. I work for Apogee Instruments here in Logan, Utah, just down the street from Utah State University. So Apogee is a company owned and founded by a professor at USU, plant physiology professor, Bruce Bugbee, who's done a lot of work with controlled environments for plants and is well known. One of the things I think he's well known for is developing some varieties of plants that are kind of dwarf, and they're specially kind of designed and developed for use on the space station. So he's kind of known as the NASA plant guy. But regardless, he's also had this longstanding interest in instruments, scientific instruments, and especially for light for plants. And so Apogee is one of the leaders in these PAR sensors. We call them quantum sensors, but because they were measuring quanta of light, the photons are kind of little packets of energy. But PAR sensors is a more commonly used term. I do have some slides. Let me try and share my screen here. Can you see this PowerPoint?
Yes, we're seeing the whole PowerPoint program, not just the, there you go, yeah.
Okay. All right, so I'll go through, some of this is a little bit more technical than other parts, but I'll go through it quickly and then we'll get to some of the specific information about that MQ 500 meter that you have. So as a little bit of background, there's multiple radiation sources that can provide light for plants. They provide different kind of spectral outputs. And so your quantum meter needs to be able to provide a reliable measure of the intensity of that light, regardless of the type of spectral output that is on the scene. LEDs are increasingly being used and they're known for having narrow wavelength ranges. And so those narrow wavelength ranges are kind of a challenge for PAR sensors to be able to measure correctly and accurately, because if the ideal spectral response is kind of a flat and even spectral response across that 400 to 700 nanometer wavelength range. And so if it drops off and it doesn't measure a portion of that very effectively, and that happens to be where your LED is emitting a lot of light, then your meter is going to be reading probably low. But if it's overly sensitive to that portion of the spectrum, then it'll read high. These are some definitions. Maybe we'll go through them real quickly. PAR, photosynthetically active radiation, photon flux density, PFD, versus the third line, PPFD. So the only difference between those two is the addition of the word photosynthetic. So both of these refer to the number of photons of light per unit area, per unit time. And then the photosynthetic means that it's between 400 and 700 nanometers. This is basically the visible spectrum, blue through, the colors of the rainbow, blue through red, whereas plants can basically use those wavelengths more or less consistently and of the same sensitivity, whereas our human eyes are more sensitive. We see green a lot better, and our visible sensitivity drops off in the red and the blue. Yield photon flux, I'll cover that on a future slide. Quantum is a single photon or a mole of photons, so this is why Apogee refers to them as quantum sensors rather than PAR sensors, though we use both terms. And then a quantum sensor, a PAR sensor, is designed to measure PPFD. I don't go into spectroradiometers in this presentation. There are higher end instruments that'll give you the whole. You could use a spectroradiometer to get that graph of spectral output of your particular light, and you would know precisely how much blue and green and red your particular light is putting out. And you could integrate over the 400 to 700 nanometer wavelength range to get PAR. So this is a famous curve called the Mccree Curve. It was developed by John Mccree, I think his first name is John. Back in 1972, he published this. This is a depiction of the photosynthetic activity or the photosynthetic response of plants to different wavelengths of light. And what he did is he took individual leaves and he shot narrow wavelengths of light at the leaves, and he measured CO2 uptake as a proxy for photosynthetic activity. So he did this across all these wavelengths of light looks like from about 300 to 800, and he derived this curve. And you can see there's the highest sensitivity in the red region, in this 600, 650 nanometer region. In the blue, there's also kind of a peak, and then in the green, it dips down, and that kind of makes sense because plants look green to us, and so that's because they reflect more of those green photons. But regardless, plants can use all of those wavelengths, and so over time, the scientific community and the horticultural community has adopted this definition of PAR that uses nice round numbers, 400 and 700 nanometer wavelengths, evenly weighted across those. So that's this rectangular spectral response that's superimposed on the Mccree curve. So when we're talking about PAR sensors, they're sensors or meters that have a spectral sensitivity that is supposed to very nearly approximate this rectangular response curve, where they perfectly measure photons in that 400 to 700 range, and they exclude all photons outside of that. Here's a slide that's about spectroradiometers as opposed to quantum sensors. So quantum sensors are just providing a single value, and it's that integrated value over the 400 to 700 nanometer range. A spectroradiometer will split the light into all the colors or all the wavelengths, and it can measure those wavelengths individually. But we'll leave that alone for the time being. So there are a lot of different types of power sensors on the market, and Jennifer mentioned that you have a Lycor, or she has a Lycor and an Apogee. And so here's a look at some other models. The Lycor LI190 is the one I'm more familiar with, and it's a well-known model. And you can see in the lower right panel here, our Apogee model SQ500. This is our high-end model. Very closely approximates the rectangular PAR range. And we have a lower end instrument that we refer to as our original PAR sensors, our original quantum sensors. SQ110, SQ120 is the other one. And you can see that this spectral response is a bit imperfect. It misses some of the red photons here, and it kind of underweights some of the blue. So if you use a sensor that's kind of imperfect like that under a broad spectrum light source, it's still going to provide you very good measurements. But now if you use this original Apogee sensor under a red LED, it's just emitting its photons in 650 to 700 nanometers. The sensor's not going to really pick that up. So that kind of gets to the spectral sensitivity consideration that I alluded to a little earlier. And some other models here from a company called Kip & Zone, and another one from Ag Instruments in the UK. Here's a kind of an up-close look at the two models that we have, our full spectrum and our original. The full spectrum has that blue-headed sensor that you have attached to your MQ500, and the original is a black-colored sensor head. This slide discusses some of that spectral error consideration that I just mentioned. So this red line is the output of a red LED. Well, primarily red. Looks like there's a spike of blue down here around 450 nanometers as well. But you can see that this Apogee original quantum is going to do a poor job of measuring the red photons in these longer wavelengths. Even though they're in the PAR range, this model sensor misses some of those. And so this is a table that kind of has radiation sources on the left in each row, and then a characterization of the magnitude of the spectral error in percent for these different quantum sensors. And so the Apogees are the last two columns here, SQ110, SQ500. And you can see that the SQ500 has very low error under a broad variety of light sources. This green LED says it reads 5% high, but I think this data might be a little bit outdated. I think we made a slight improvement to the full spectrum response. Whereas our lower end model, you can see this, 65% low or 60% low under primarily red LEDs is cause for concern. So it's just all these slides, all this verbiage to just kind of suggest that the quality and the consistency of the spectral response and how well it matches that PAR curve is going to be a big determinant of how well your sensor will perform under a variety of light sources. And so our high-end model and some other high-end models on the market will perform well under all kinds of lights. You can get a cheaper PAR sensor that'll probably be fine under sunlight, but if you then take it under a variety of electric lights, be aware that spectral errors are likely to be affecting your measurements. Okay, so here's a few of our Apogee products. The MQ500 is the one that Jennifer has. And this is, I think, our best-selling product. We sell a ton of these through our website and to researchers and hobbyists. We've, of course, sold a lot to the burgeoning cannabis industry in the US and Canada and around the world. So it's a simple little thing. It's a handheld device with an LCD display. And so the number on the display is that PPFD value, the photosynthetic photon flux density. And it'll change instantaneously, essentially. You cover the sensor head with your hand, it should drop to 0. If you point the sensor at a light source, it will read higher, and if you point it away from a light source, it will read lower, and so on. On the right side of this screen, I have the MQ510. This is essentially the same hardware. It's just been calibrated to read accurately underwater. This was kind of an unexpected portion of the market for Apogee, but there's a lot of aquarium enthusiasts that want to precisely measure the PAR levels for their corals, so their aquariums will be as pretty as possible. And to measure underwater, you need to take into account the refractive index of water and the fact that the photons will tend to bounce off of the sensor more. And so we've characterized that. We have a little white paper on our website you could check out if you want to read the details. But the only difference between these two is the underwater one will read 33% higher, maybe 32% higher than the one in air. So if you had one or the other, you could use either one for air or water if you know that conversion factor. And some of the features of these meters. So they're pretty simple, and I think that simplicity is one of their benefits. There's not too many bells and whistles to get confused by. Like I said, the value on the screen is the instantaneous true reading of the light intensity. If you put it in sample mode, you can see on this screen that says SMPL, and so it's in sample mode. If you hit the sample button, this number up in the right, it says 00 now, but it'll increment up by 1. You can save up to 99 sample measurements. So, you know, maybe you're in your first greenhouse and you take 10 measurements at 10 different spots, and you know what those are associated with. And so and now you can scroll through your saved measurements. So that's the sample mode. If you put in log mode, it'll turn itself on and off every 30 seconds and take a temporary reading, and then it'll save a half-hour average. So it'll save 30-minute averages, and again, it can save 99 of those. So that's about 2 days worth of data. And again, you can scroll through those values and see the last 99 values. So with this, you could measure your DLI value, the daily light integral, which is essentially just the summation of all the PPFD values over the course of 24 hours. DLI is expressed in moles per day, moles per meter squared per day, as opposed to micromoles per meter squared per second, but it's just a unit conversion. And so DLI is just a summary of the PPFD values over a day. And if you wanted to not transcribe the data from the screen to your notebook or your Excel file, you could pick up our USB cable. There's a picture in the lower right of the screen. There's a special chip on here that'll allow the meter to communicate with the computer. So a standard USB cable won't work. You need this special one from us. And all this allows you to do is transfer the data, transfer your 99 measurements, or your 99 sample measurements, your 99 log measurements to your computer. If you do that, the meter will it also does have the DLI values saved in there, but there's no way to see them other than getting that cable and transferring to the computer. So that's an overview of the kind of the features and technical abilities of the meter. In the middle, I have the picture of the AL100 leveling plate, and you can see there's a bubble level there and some screws that you can adjust to make sure that your sensor is perfectly flat and level if you want to be sure that you have it oriented to get the best measurements. The accuracy of the measurements will adjust based on the cosine of the zenith angle. So if it's 1 degree out of normal or out of straight up, it'll be the cosine of, oh boy, I always forget if it's the cosine of 89 or it's the cosine of 1. But it's a cosine of that 1 degree of incremental out of level that is the magnitude of the error. And frankly, if it's only 1 or 2 degrees out of normal or out of level, it's going to have a pretty small effect on the measurements. But of course, for the best measurements, ensuring it's flat and level is a good idea. Let's see. On this screen, I guess I first want to mention, just because I was just talking about that leveling plate, these little green discs. So this is sort of a lower cost option we've started selling. If a person doesn't need the $40 leveling plate, they can get this little disc. I think it's about $10, and it'll just hold your sensor upright, prevent it from falling over. And so if it's on a reasonably flat surface, then you can be reasonably assured it's flat. if you want that bubble level, then you can spring for the higher end leveling plate. But regardless, the bigger message on this page is our microcache logging device. And so this is there's a picture of it, the AT100. It's a little device that'll interface with your smartphone. And so you can download our app for iPhone or Android, and then you can connect to it with Bluetooth, and you can set up logging parameters. I should say, so you need the microcache and you need a sensor. And we sell some packages, some package deals. This is an alternative to the MQ500. The MQ500 is fine. That's one way to take your measurements. These microcache packages are a new thing that Apogee, well, we've been selling for over a year, I think. But it's the same type of accuracy, and this microcache has more bells and whistles. Essentially, you can see par value curves through the course of the day. The app will calculate DLI values. The microcache can log for, I think we say 9 months of 1 minute values. So if you do 10-minute values, it should last for well over a year. And so the microcache is a nice little device. It'll interface with any of our unamplified analog sensors. So you could hook it up to some of our other sensors as well. You could hook it up to a surface temperature sensor. You could hook it up to a long wave sensor, a pyranometer to measure solar radiation. But anyway, so that's the microcache, and there's a look at the app, one of the screens from the app there on the right. Here's a few other related products from Apogee. So at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that Mccree Curve, and the Mccree Curve indicated that plants do use some radiation, some photons outside of that 400 to 700 nanometer range. And so both of these sensors address that. The one on the left is what we call our PAR-FAR sensor, and it'll provide two signals. One is that PAR signal. The equivalent accuracy is that blue-headed full spectrum PAR sensor I was talking about earlier. And the second signal is proportional to far red radiation from 700 to 760 nanometers. This has photosynthetic effects. It also has effects on plant morphology. The ratio of far red and PAR light sends signals to the plants about their light environment, whether it's shaded, whether it's full sun, whether the plant should put its energy into growing tall or bushy. And so the PAR-FAR is kind of a new cutting edge tool. It will integrate with that microcache as well if you wanted to pair it with that. It's not available attached to a handheld meter. On the right, we have a coming soon sensor that we're calling the ePAR, extended PAR. And you can see it has some sloping sides of the spectral response that go outside of the 400 to 700 nanometer traditional PAR range. And this kind of approximates that Mccree curve, but evenly weights all the wavelengths from about 400 to about 750 nanometers. So that'll be available, should be available later this year. One last slide here before we get to any questions or comments you have. This device is what we call a line quantum sensor. And so it's designed to measure PAR under a plant canopy where it might be sort of alternately sunny or shaded. And so you can see all these little white dots on this line quantum are each PAR sensors. They're the lower end model, so this is best for use in sunlight. If you use it under electric lights, you'd want to consider correction factors. But anyway, you could measure the amount of PAR. You can measure above the canopy, and then you can use a line quantum to measure below the canopy, and you know how much of the PAR radiation is being absorbed by the plant canopy. So those are our line quantum sensors. And then I think my last slide here is just questions and comments. 10:30, so I think we got right on time, I hope.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ben. I will let people just jump on in with questions from that fascinating talk.
Ben, I just had a question about the wand and what kind of application that gets used for most often, like the putting the sensor on a wand that you can then.
Yeah, it's the video's back on me now, I think. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I have the wand here. So here's our little extendable wand. It is a nice solution for being able to, you know, if you mount your sensor head here on the wand, then you can reach it out over your plant canopy beyond your arm's length. And so that's the primary purpose of it, is to facilitate getting to hard to reach spots, hard to reach places. We have an underwater version of the wand too. It's this big thing, and it kind of unscrews into different sections, because that telescoping wand will rust if you stick it in the aquarium enough times. But yeah, thanks for mentioning the wand. I think on our website, I don't think the wand comes with the MQ500 purchase, but people frequently pair it with that. And then it comes with a little carrying pouch. I don't have one in front of me at the time, but
yeah, we did get that with our.
Oh yeah, so you got that's the big hardcover case, and we still have that available. And now we offer for free with if you order on our website, it's a soft pouch, and it's a little bit smaller than that. Yep, just like that. That's the one. Thanks for bringing it. Yeah. So this is that micro cache, little guy. Here's what it is attached to the. This is an SQ500 sensor, the blue sensor, and if you wanted to, you could get one with a 2-meter cable rather than this short 30-centimeter cable. But anyway, this micro cache is, you know, weatherproof, and you could leave it. I've had them on the roof of the Apogee building I think I've had them up there for a year, and it's doing great. It's gotten blown off a few times, but it keeps on ticking. I'll mention, I guess, one more thing I didn't have in my slides. This is another coming soon product, and what this will do, if you turn it on, it gives your instantaneous PAR value. The sensor's on the top there, and the idea is you could just stick this in your windowsill or in your greenhouse or wherever. It'll sit there and log, and then you can scroll through the display and see how many days ago. It'll store 7 days worth of BLI values and your photo period values. So photo period would mean light intensity exceeded the threshold that's pre-programmed into this, but your lights were on for 14 hours a day, or 14.7 hours, or 18 hours. This thing will tell you how long your photo period was, your DLI value, which is the total PPFD summation over the course of 24 hours, and then your instantaneous PPFD as well. So anyway, we're thinking that I think this will be a nice seller. It doesn't have the meter with the separate sensor. It's all kind of a small integrated thing, but it'll be a little less expensive. So anyway, we'll have that available hopefully later 2021 as well.
Can you say Ben, how much that would cost, that one that you just showed?
Oh, I don't think we've settled on a final price on this. The MQ500, the meter, this thing is around $530 online, and I think it'll be at least $100 less. I'm not 100% sure, but it'll be less, maybe $350. I'm not sure.
And Ben, what's the name of that device's model?
That's a great question. We haven't finished that either, but internally we've been calling it the DLIP, which is a terrible name, but DLIP. DLI is daily light integral, and P is the photo period. So you could just call it the DLI meter or something like that, and you could shoot an email over to tech support at Apogee Instruments, and we'd be happy to tell you the latest name we've come up for it. But we don't have a model yet.
I think you should call it the cutie pie, because it's littler and cuter than this.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We'll have to figure out how to integrate some kind of reference to photosynthetic photon flux in there, but the cutie PPFD or something, I don't know.
I have a question about, so I have in my little indoor grow system to get, the starts going, we have some LED lights, and some of them are purple, and, it's like buying the grow lights. A lot of people just go buy the grow lights that they have available at their local, Home Depot or wherever. Would these be good for measuring that light under that grow system? Like the small scale producers would use?
Yes, so this will be available in a couple different with a couple different sensors in it. The lower cost sensor, the full spectrum sensor, and I think we'll have the E-PAR in there as well. So of all those options, currently the full spectrum sensor, like what you have, that MQ500 with the blue head, I would say is the best option currently, because that's the range that people have been using for decades, and it's a great measurement for light available for plants. And these higher end models, the MQ500, that nicely match that PAR rectangular spectral response curve. What that means is that could be any combination of light. It could be sunlight with some LEDs. It could be in a greenhouse with some compact fluorescence or metal halide lights. Whatever combination of lights, because the spectral sensitivity is near perfect, it's going to have minimal errors regardless of the lighting characteristics.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have one of the PAR or PAR meters, and there's another one, Kate, right, for Southern Idaho. If you're interested, if you're sort of in the northern part of the state and interested in borrowing this, let me know and we can figure out how to get it to you. Or the one in the southern part of the state can be loaned out to the educators there.
Yeah, at this point, I haven't sent it yet, and I will send it. I'm just got to send it a good way because they're expensive, to Ariel, and I'll let her decide what office will be in charge of loaning it out.
I'll mention, so Apogee doesn't have any rental programs for our sensors, but we do sell a lot, just in case you guys need another one, but you don't want to buy one. We work with a group called Bulk Reef Supply, and they sell a lot into the aquarium market. So they would have the underwater meter available, and they have a rental program. I think it's a 1-week rental, and it's like $50 or something. You can find it on their website, Bulk Reef Supply. And so don't worry about it being an underwater meter. You would just divide the value by 1.32, either 1.32 or 1.33. I can give you the details, but it's just a little bit of arithmetic, and you can get excellent readings for in-air use. So just a side note, if that is of interest to anybody.
Well, fantastic. Ben, thank you so much for that fascinating presentation. I think Iris is right. We need to go back, do a little more physics to understand it fully, but really great.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. I hope I didn't get into the technical details and the weeds